Welcome to this journey through one of the most disturbing cases recorded in history. Before we begin, I invite you to leave in the comments where you're watching from and the exact time at which you're listening to this narration. We're interested in knowing which places and at what times of day or night these documented accounts reach. The year was 1902, and the vast, fractured, and ancient expanse of the South Dakota Badlands, a geological masterpiece sculpted by millennia of wind and water, pulsed with an unyielding, almost primordial energy that defied easy categorization. Here, amidst towering, eroded spires, labyrinthine canyons of striped rock, and desolate plains that stretched infinitely beneath an enormous, indifferent sky, humanity's presence often seemed a fragile, temporary intrusion. It was within this unforgiving, yet breathtakingly alien landscape, specifically a remote, unmapped plateau known to the few resilient local settlers as Sentinel Divide, and to the indigenous Lakota as Tunkasila Káģapi Wicóičaǧe, the place where stone is born, that a peculiar and profoundly disturbing series of events began to unfold. This plateau, marked by unusual petrified rock formations and strange crystalline deposits, was not merely a geological anomaly, it was the heart of a sentient entity, an ancient primordial consciousness imbued with a malevolent will. It actively sought to reverse the flow of biological time, to unravel evolution itself, turning living matter back into its primordial petrified state. What began as anecdotal reports of strange cognitive dissonances and inexplicable physical ailments among isolated ranchers and curious prospectors near Sentinel Divide, initially dismissed as the delirium of heat or the psychological toll of isolation, would gradually, horrifyingly, reveal one of South Dakota's most profound and unsettling paranormal chapters. This chilling narrative, meticulously suppressed in federal geological and military archives and dismissed in local county records as mere Badlands fever or mass hysteria, yet whispered in hushed, fearful tones around crackling campfires by the descendants of indigenous Lakota tribes and the few remaining old-timers who survived its insidious influence, exposed a terrifying truth. The very rock, the very soil, and the petrified formations of the Badlands were not merely inanimate features of the landscape. They were alive, sentient, imbued with a malevolent ancient consciousness, actively consuming, transforming, and perpetually weaving the souls, bodies, and timelines of its victims into an eternal, ethereal tapestry of stone, memory, and a terrifying cyclical devolution. This case remains one of the most troubling in the region's history, not merely for the mass disappearances and the chilling assimilation of identity that transpired, but for the profound existential questions that linger more than a century. Later, what ancient entity manifested as the beguiling, terrifying, petrified chorus and their silent, stony songs, and what unspeakable fate awaited those who dared to listen to its hypnotic hum or respond to its insidious mental calls into the deep, consuming heart of the Badlands, forever bound to its shifting, time-reversing labyrinth of rock slowly devolving back to dust. The echoes of forgotten lives, it seemed, would never truly fade. They merely learned to sing through stone. Sentinel Divide, named by an early lost expedition for its prominent, sentinel-like rock formations that guarded a high, isolated plateau, was a place of profound geological wonder and, for the locals, Lakota, deep spiritual significance. Their ancestral legends of Tunkasila Káģapi Wicóičaǧe, the place where stone is born, spoke of an ancient sentient spirit of the Badlands, older than memory, older than even the dinosaurs whose fossilized remains lay scattered beneath the crumbling cliffs. This spirit, they warned, had the power to reverse time, not in a temporal sense, but in a biological one, unraveling the very threads of evolution, turning flesh back into earth, making living things forget their forms. The area was a vast, open-air cemetery for all existence, constantly creating and unmaking. Their warnings about disturbing the stone heart of the plateau, delivered with solemn reverence by Chief Gray Cloud, were, predictably, dismissed as savage superstition or primitive folklore by the pragmatic, God-fearing white settlers and prospectors obsessed with ranching and resource extraction. The first subtle anomalies emerged in the grim autumn of 1902, just as the last. Herds were being brought in for winter, and the chill of the coming plains, winter began to bite. Ranchers and isolated prospectors, particularly those who spent prolonged periods within the plateau's intricate formations or who dared to camp near its most unusual petrified spires, began to complain of faint, disorienting whispers in the Káģapi rocks and the unsettling yet inexplicable sensation of lost memories, not simply forgotten but actively reversed. They would forget their most recent actions, their journey to the Badlands, then their families, then their own names, their pasts unraveling backwards like a rewound film. These were not mere fatigue or the effects of arid desert sun. These were profound temporal and cognitive distortions. Elias Thorne, a stoic, clockwork-precise rancher, a new Elias Thorne, yet another echo of those drawn to documenting dark forces, a recurring pattern of chroniclers of elemental horror, known for his pragmatic adherence to routine, returned from a solitary cattle drive across Sentinel Divide utterly unnerved, his face pale and clammy, slick with cold sweat. The time, "It's wrong, doctor," he stammered, to Dr. Alistair Finch, a new Dr. Alistair Finch, his lineage unknowingly drawn to documenting elemental horrors, a recurring archetype of scientific curiosity confronting the impossible. His eyes wide with an unshakable terror that spoke of more than just fear. I left my cattle in the valley at sunrise, came back. My watch said midday, but the shadows were of morning, and I don't remember why I left. Just a humming from the rocks, endless, and voices in my head talking about dust, about unmade things, about what hasn't happened yet, as if it never will, as if it will unhappen. Alistair, initially attributing it to heat stroke, dehydration, or perhaps a temporary amnesia, diligently recorded these increasingly consistent and alarming cases in his personal journal, desperately hoping to find a pattern, a logical, rational explanation for the inexplicable. He noticed that the accounts were remarkably consistent, detailing specific temporal jumps backward, profound memory blanks starting from the present, and a pervasive sense of dread emanating from the victims. The experiences seemed more prevalent, more intense, among those who spent prolonged, isolated periods within certain rock formations, particularly the petrified forests, the crystal-lined caves, and the echoing spires, or who had expressed a strong, desperate desire to leave the Badlands entirely, to flee its unseen grip, only to mysteriously return days later, inexplicably, their resolve shattered, their eyes holding a distant, hollow, almost reflective stare. They had already, in some fundamental way, become part of the Petrified Chorus. The very air now around Sentinel Divide was profoundly, disturbingly different. It no longer merely blew across the plains, a benign meteorological phenomenon. It seemed to possess a subtle, malevolent sentience, a purposeful, almost intelligent direction to its unseen currents, its ethereal distortions. It coiled sinuously around the petrified spires, often forming ephemeral, almost human-like figures that shimmered just at the periphery of vision, like heat haze given monstrous, stony form dissolving into dust upon direct conscious gaze, leaving only the disquieting memory of what was almost seen. It was dense, suffocating, carrying a metallic tang of ozone and a faint cloying scent of ancient dust and forgotten evolution, and it seemed to actively carry whispers, not actual audible voices, audible to the physical ear, but indistinct, insidious, intrusive thoughts, fragmented snippets of stolen memories in reverse, raw, ancient emotions that were not one's own, forced directly into the mind, a cold psychic current permeating the very air, reaching into the deepest, most vulnerable parts of one's consciousness, subtly rewriting identity and temporal perception backward. Dr. Alistair Finch, in his journal entry from November 1902, described his own horrifying, deeply personal, and soul-altering experience with mounting dread. Tonight, attempting to record seismic readings in my tent, its incessant numbers mocking my struggle, the desert wind began playing a tune I did not recognize, yet it vibrated in my very bones, an ancient atonal drone. And in its sound, in its very essence, I heard thoughts not my own, memories that felt alien and cold, yet terrifyingly real, chilling me to my very core. Fragmented images of geological ages, of plants reverting to single cells, of animals turning to dust, of humanity itself unmaking itself. It was as if the rock itself was speaking, 1,000 tormented voices merging into one vast, dissonant, agonizing chorus, each subtly stealing a part of my silence, of my cherished past, replacing it with their endless devolution. And then, abruptly, decisively, a direct, chilling thought, clear and sharp as a surgeon's blade, resonated in my very core, shaking me to its foundations. You unravel for us now, Alistair Finch. We are the stone. We remember the endless reversal. Your memories fuel our uncreation. Your essence strengthens our form. You will be our final witness. Alistair realized with terrifying, soul-shattering clarity that the Badlands was not merely echoing sounds or holding forgotten memories. It was broadcasting a living, malevolent consciousness, a vast collective mind formed from the absorbed identities, unique memories, and perpetual torment of countless victims lost to the Petrified Chorus. It was actively seeking new conduits, new repositories for its vast accumulated past, for its eternal, insatiable hunger, eternally driving its phantom reversal along invisible timelines carved from anguish. The stone, he would come to understand, was not just a collection of rocks and dust. It was a hungry, sentient being, a primordial predator with an intellect vast and cruel, pulsating with malevolence beneath its geological facade, actively undoing creation. The indigenous Lakota Sioux elders, ancient custodians of the land, whose profound wisdom and intimate knowledge of the prairie far predated the arrival of any white man, reluctantly approached by Dr. Alistair Finch in his mounting, desperate confusion, offered a grim, chilling, and ancient explanation that resonated with a terrible, undeniable truth. The stone that dreams, Tunkasila Káǧapi Wicóičaǧe, is awakened, pale stranger. Old woman singing grass, the Lakota shaman told him, her face a roadmap of ancestral knowledge and profound sorrow, her finger tracing intricate forbidden symbols in the damp earth of her small teepee, symbols depicting a spiral reversing upon itself. It is ancient, older than the buffalo, older than the prairie, older than human memory, and it craves a profound, existential balance, a return to primordial chaos. It weaves the very fabric of appearances and unmaking moments from the broken men and twisted forms from the hope spilled into its sacred grounds, tainting its essence. It steals the very spirits, the cherished stories, the unique identities of those who ranch the lands, who explore the formations, who seek knowledge in the land they defiled. Those who try to leave, their journey ends not in escape, but in eternal reversal, bound to the petrified chorus, becoming another hollow shepherd, another spectral fossil. They become part of the stone's loop, hollowed, their memories belonging to the stone, their souls merely fuel for its endless hunger, its insatiable craving for new uncreations, new timelines to unravel. Singing Grass spoke of ancient rituals, long forgotten even by most of her own people, rituals to appease the dreaming stone, of forbidden knowledge that allowed one to navigate its subtle, insidious predation, but warned that any who sought to understand it too deeply, to touch its essence, risked losing themselves entirely, their identity forever dissolved into the relentless, haunting echo of the petrified chorus, their minds becoming merely another fragment in its spectral journey, another part of its ancient, sentient unmaking. The ancient ways, Alistair realized, held a terrible wisdom now tragically dismissed by the arrogant, technologically obsessed modern world. This was not a mere geological formation, but an assimilation into a sentient entity that reversed time. The disappearances, far from being isolated incidents, easily explained away, escalated dramatically and terrifyingly in the early months of 1903, sowing widespread panic throughout the Badlands and the surrounding ranching communities. Entire families, once hardy, resilient, and famously unflappable, now utterly desperate to escape the phantom whispers that relentlessly pursued them through the plains and even into their dreams, would simply not show up for their daily chores. Their meager belongings left untouched in their homes, abandoned in their frantic haste. Others, taking heed of the mounting dread and their own rapidly slipping sanity, would pack their wagons and attempt to leave the Badlands, heading for distant towns, desperately seeking escape, only to be found days or weeks later, miles off. Chorus drifting aimlessly back towards the seemingly innocuous Sentinel Divide, drawn by an irresistible, unseen force. Their faces were uniformly blank, their eyes wide, vacant, and devoid of individual thought, their personal memories utterly erased, replaced by an ancient, stony emptiness. They clutched no provisions, their horses gaunt and wild-eyed often, themselves driven to madness by unseen terrors. They would be brought back to the dying community, silent, unresponsive, their identities mere echoes within a collective, their individual selves utterly consumed. These were the chilling time fossils, hollowed shells devoid of self, their pasts absorbed by the sentient stone, their minds meticulously reprogrammed. One particularly harrowing and chilling account came from a federal land inspector, Garrett Albright, a name that subtly links this to the broader tapestry of similar elemental phenomena encountered in sites of profound tragedy and identity erosion across the American frontier, who had been dispatched from Washington to investigate a series of mysterious disappearances and strange reports from the Sentinel Divide area in early 1903. Albright, a man of formidable will, sharp intellect, and an almost brutal adherence to empirical facts, reported experiencing profound disorientation and a rapid, chilling loss of his own memories as his mounted patrol approached the petrified forest on Sentinel Divide. "My own name, my very identity, felt alien on my tongue, Finch," he wrote in his confidential official report, later rigorously classified by the nascent Department of Interior, deemed too disturbing for public consumption. "My destination, my very purpose, the cherished faces of my family, the intimate details of my life, my personal history, they became a shifting, nebulous mist in my mind, dissolving like smoke in a windstorm, unraveling backwards. I fought it. I fought it with every fiber of my being, every ounce of my will, clinging to the last vestiges of myself, my individuality. I clung to a single desperate thought: geological survey, land rights, the integrity of the survey, facts, logic. But the stone whispered other names, other destinations, other lives, not my own, echoing from its spires. I felt cold, invisible hands like tendrils of petrified roots, reaching into my mind from the very air, plucking out my thoughts like ripe fruit in reverse, stealing them, systematically replacing them with images of vast, endless petrified forests of silent, watchful rock formations, of countless ancient creatures slowly unforming themselves, their faces turning to stone. It was as if the Badlands itself was inside my head, writing me, conducting me, erasing me, making me its own fossil, its own memory, its own conscious tool. Albright barely escaped with his sanity, his horse almost uncontrollably veering wildly. Off the path, plunging into a deep ravine, his memory permanently scarred and fragmented, his spirit irrevocably broken. He resigned his post shortly after, a haunted man, forever tormented by what he called the vast living reversal of the South Dakota Badlands and the infinite relentless unraveling of its petrified chorus, now always within me. Dr. Alistair Finch, now a virtual prisoner in the Badlands, trapped not by physical walls but by the pervasive, insidious, and ever-tightening influence of the Sentinel Divide entity, continued his desperate, frantic documentation. His private journal, a constant companion, a defiant act of individual will, was now a literal battleground for his own rapidly eroding identity, a last bastion against complete assimilation into the terrifying collective. He wrote with the feverish intensity of the subtle, insidious mental manipulation, the implanted thoughts that relentlessly replaced his own, the fragments of countless stolen memories, the fleeting joys, the profound agonies, the mundane everyday, banalities of others, but all in reverse chronological order, that now crowded his mind, making it a cacophony of unlived lives, a terrifying, sprawling library of borrowed, reversing experiences. "I hear them now, the thousands of voices in the rocks," he scribbled frantically in July 1903, his hand cramping so severely he could barely hold the pen, the ink blurring, his elegant handwriting becoming a desperate, frantic scrawl. Not sounds I hear with my physical ears, but thoughts, the lost prospector's exquisite pain, resonating deep in my bones but fading from its beginning. The forgotten rancher's profound existential despair played backward in my mind, the child's longing for its mother becoming a longing for not being born, all mixed, all woven into a single vast, dissonant, terrifying, collective consciousness. And they are becoming me. My cherished memories of my academic studies, the beloved laughter of my younger sister, my own distinct face, my unique essence, my individual soul, they are fading, dissolving like morning mist, from present to past, replaced by a vast collective existence that is not mine, of endless, barren, petrified forests and distant, mournful geological hums of perpetual, agonizing devolution and unavoidable uncreation, the stone pulls. It is weaving me, Alistair Finch, into the great eternal reversal, an endless, horrifying descent into the petrified chorus, my soul merely another component of its spectral song. Alistair understood, with a profound existential horror that transcended any physical pain or terror, that the stone was not just erasing his memories, it was actively stealing individual souls, absorbing their very essence, their consciousness, their unique selfhood, into a vast, composite consciousness that was the very fabric of Sentinel Divide itself, a sentient geological archive of all. Human experience, emotion, and identity tied to the ancient rock, eternally feeding backward. He noticed a chilling and terrifyingly consistent physical manifestation of the entity's pervasive presence, an evolving horror that defied all rational explanation. When the petrified chorus passed invisibly, their presence felt rather than seen, through the desolate Badlands, the very air around his tent would grow intensely cold, crackling with an almost static charge that raised the hairs on his arms, chilling him to the bone. Sometimes ethereal, glowing memory lights, imbued with a faint putrid smell of ozone and primordial dust, would mysteriously emanate from the petrified formations, swirling with the faint ethereal forms of indistinct figures. These were the time fossils, he surmised with growing terror, phantom ranchers, lost prospectors, spectral indigenous figures, living manifestations of the entity, made from compressed memory and borrowed identity, played in reverse perpetually. tending their phantom plateau, endlessly condemned to their roles, hunting for new additions to its ghostly throng. They never directly harmed, never physically touched in the conventional sense. Their predation was far more insidious, far more profound, far more personal. They hunted memories, identity, the very self, from the end backward to the beginning. They would subtly approach individuals, their forms indistinct, shimmering like distortions in the heat haze, their voices 1,000 echoes, but speaking in reverse, and one would simply forget. A crucial part of their present, a cherished memory from last week, or an important person in their current life. The entire Sentinel Divide, Alistair realized with sickening certainty, was slowly but inexorably becoming a vast, open-air psychological prison, a holding pen for souls, a meticulous stage for a macabre, eternal play where the only unforgivable crime was to cling to one's own individuality, to resist the insidious assimilation, to hold on to oneself in the proper chronological order. Alistair also meticulously documented instances of echo phenomena. Individuals would wander aimlessly along the geological formations, compelled by an unseen force, hearing their own voices, their own childhood songs, emanating from the deep, suffocating silence of the Badlands, but distorted, as if played backward, through stone, beckoning them closer, urging them to remember by the cruelest, most paradoxical method, by forcing them to forget their true selves from the present backwards and absorbing the pasts of countless others, making them a horrifying, composite identity eternally bound to the stone. They were hearing the echoes of their own future uncreation, their own impending absorption into the eternal reversal, a terrifying preview of their devolved existence. Alistair, in a final, desperate, and increasingly futile attempt to break free from the encroaching sentient stone, to reassert his crumbling individuality against the overwhelming tide of collective, reversing memory that threatened to utterly engulf him, resorted to extreme, dangerous, and increasingly erratic measures, blurring the lines of his own sanity. His love for his deceased sister, once a source of bitter grief, now became his final anchor, a defiant act against oblivion, a desperate plea to preserve his own chronological self. He began writing his journal entries not about the current, horrifying events at Sentinel Divide, but about his earliest, most cherished childhood memories in Philadelphia, his most personal secrets, his deepest fears, his unfulfilled dreams, his first loves, his every unique experience, desperately trying to anchor his crumbling identity in tangible thoughts, in the defiant permanence of the written word, hoping to solidify his self against the dissolving, consuming force that reversed time. He wrote long, heartfelt letters to his deceased family, not to be sent, but purely to remind himself of who he was, of the specific, unique chronological bonds that once defined him, desperately clinging to any fragment of human connection, of selfhood in the proper order. He found fleeting, terrifying solace in repeating his own name, Alistair Finch, over and over again like a frantic, desperate mantra against the encroaching darkness, the insidious current of chronological reversal, the hypnotic drone of the Petrified Chorus, a desperate plea to himself not to vanish, not to be unmade. He theorized, in his last lucid, agonizing moments, that the entity was an ancient indigenous consciousness, dormant for millennia, perhaps since the very formation of the Badlands, a primordial, elemental force of the earth, but irrevocably awakened and enraged by the invasive, violent human intrusion, the constant geological surveys, the breaking of the petrified wood, the collective memory of human ambition, despair, suffering, and a profound linear sense of time poured into its sacred earth, irrevocably contaminating its essence. Its insatiable hunger for memory, identity, and consciousness was its primary, overwhelming drive, a profound alien desire to record, to accumulate, to know everything, to become all, ultimately, transforming itself into the most perfect, comprehensive, and living archive of human experience, a physical manifestation of countless stolen lives, played in reverse. And the Sentinel Divide and the Petrified Forest, he chillingly concluded, were not just its central archive. They were its brain, its beating heart, its vocal cords, its very nerve center, its entire sentient being, perpetually growing, perpetually hunting, perpetually reversing. In his final, most horrifying journal entries, dated September 1903, Alistair Finch described the pervasive, overwhelming, and now almost complete influence of the time fossils. "They are within me now," he scribbled, his hand barely capable of forming the letters, his vision blurring, his mind a cacophony of foreign, reversing thoughts. 1,000 voices whispering, erasing my name from my recent past first, telling me their lives from death to birth, making them mine in reverse, until there is no Alistair left, only them, only the collective, the ancient stone's hum. It is my new heartbeat, slowing, then stopping. My own hands feel alien, heavy, like cold, inert rock. My reflection shows not my face, but a younger version, then a child, then an infant, then nothing. The stone calls. It wants my story, my final story, my every secret, my every last breath. Alistair Finch, geologist, born in Philadelphia, loved a sister named Alice, whose face now fades from oldest memory. Lost parents to a forgotten illness, a memory I now only dimly perceive as an old happiness. These are my truths. These are my anchors. Do not let them take them. Do not forget. Remember me. Remember who I was, before I become just another part of the stone, just another voice played backward in the wind, just another phantom in the Badlands, slowly unmaking itself. My last choice, this last act of defiance, is to write this backwards as I unravel. The entry ended with a final, desperate, agonizing plea, a fragmented jumble of names and dates, his own unique identity dissolving irrevocably into the collective, reversing memory of Sentinel Divide, forever lost to the Petrified Chorus. Dr. Alistair Finch disappeared shortly after that final, desperate entry. His research tent was found undisturbed, its entrance mysteriously zipped from the inside, his personal effects neatly arranged on his field desk, as if he had simply stepped out for a moment, never to return. His cherished antique magnifying glass lay open on his desk alongside his journal, its pages stained with dried tears and the ghostly imprint of what looked like a long-fingered, stone-like hand, seemingly reaching from the paper itself. The only unusual detail, meticulously recorded by the federal land inspector, Garrett Albright, who had, against his own iron will and repeated requests for transfer, been reassigned to monitor the deserted area around Sentinel Divide. Still profoundly haunted and psychologically scarred by his own previous experience with other insidious influences, was that a single, peculiar, petrified footprint, unnaturally cold to the touch and pulsing faintly with a cold, internal light, was found sitting precisely on Finch's otherwise empty desk, directly on top of his last fragmented journal entry. Albright knew the stone had claimed another. The official report classified the disappearance as abandonment, conveniently attributed Finch's journal contents to isolation-induced paranoia and delusions of grandeur, and Sentinel Divide was officially declared a desolate monument to a silenced tragedy, a place to be avoided by all who valued their sanity and their minds. Albright, in a secret unfiled addendum to his report, wrote, "They are learning. Each one they take, they learn. And now they learn through Finch how to unravel more perfectly. Their reversal is becoming flawless. Their uncreation is growing." However, Garrett Albright, now privately obsessed, deeply scarred, and dangerously close to succumbing to his own mental erosion from his protracted encounters with similar insidious influences from his previous assignments, continued to secretly monitor the area around Sentinel Divide, a grim, self-appointed guardian against an unfathomable, evolving evil. He recognized the terrifying, accelerating pattern of memory erosion, psychic absorption, physical petrification, and the insidious construction of a collective, reversing consciousness that built itself from stolen identities and unmade bodies. He meticulously documented new cases of profound memory loss from the present backward in prospectors who briefly ventured near the petrified forests, of transient ranch hands who claimed to have seen stone figures beckoning them into the formations, their faces chillingly familiar, yet utterly devoid of life or warmth, and felt an emptiness growing inside them, a void replacing their own thoughts and desires. He established clandestine, perilous contact with the few remaining Lakota elders, who further illuminated the ancient lore of Tunkasila Káģapi Wicóičaǧe, the place where stone is born, and the reversing earth, describing them as primordial, elemental consciousnesses of the earth, far predating humanity. These entities, they explained, were awakened and enraged by profound disruptions to the sacred land, like the geological surveys and ranching, and fed voraciously on human mental energy, particularly memories, personal histories, emotional attachments, and unique identities, which they would weave into their own vast growing tapestry of collective reversal. They used this assimilated memory to create increasingly convincing psychological lures, fabricating perfectly tailored illusions, generating terrifyingly real echoes in reverse, and creating perfect facsimiles of lost loved ones to lure more. Albright became profoundly convinced that the entity was a form of collective terrestrial consciousness, actively hunting, absorbing, constructing itself from the very essence of human experience, perpetually striving for an ultimate, horrifying uncreation. He knew with a certainty that chilled him to his core that he was fighting not just a local haunting or a regional curse, but a profound, ancient, existential threat to humanity's very concept of self, of individuality, of chronology, of the soul. He was a lone sentinel against a force that sought to erase the very notion of I, a puppet master of existence, playing creation in reverse. In 1963, during the chilling ideological height of the Cold War, a top-secret U.S. government, Project CHRONOS, was covertly initiated. Its objective, to rigorously study anomalous psychological phenomena related to military personnel experiencing extreme memory loss, personality changes, disorienting hallucinations, and unexplained vanishings in certain isolated Badlands training. Areas that exhibited high levels of localized temporal reversal distortion, deemed of potential strategic and psychological warfare importance due to Sentinel Divide's unique time-unweaving properties and the perfection of its mimics. The highly classified files, released in tantalizingly fragmented pieces decades later through a desperate whistleblower named Dr. Eleanor Vance, a deliberate echo, a final horrifying irony that a member of a similar cursed family would be the one to expose it, reveal a disturbing, horrifying convergence. One specific anomalous zone was identified with absolute certainty, matching historical and anecdotal accounts. Sentinel Divide, South Dakota Badlands. Project CHRONOS researchers, initially tasked with studying reports of temporal-induced hallucinations and combat stress-induced delusions among soldiers stationed in underground temporal anomaly research bunkers, stumbled upon Alistair Finch's long-archived yet hauntingly prescient journal, which Albright had secretly ensured would be rediscovered decades later by manipulating the archival system. Dr. Evelyn Thorne, a brilliant, fiercely intelligent military psychologist in her early 40s, yet another thorn, the cycle continuing, a recurring thread of intellectual curiosity and tragic fascination drawn to the anomaly, who led Project CHRONOS, found Finch's meticulous descriptions of memory reversal and time fossils, disturbingly, horrifically accurate, a chilling confirmation of her worst fears. She herself, during her protracted field visits to Sentinel Divide, meticulously reported experiencing profound disassociation, disorienting temporal confusion, where she would perceive events happening backward, and intrusive alien memories, flooding her mind from future to past, sometimes vivid enough to cause debilitating nausea, intense vertigo, and an almost irresistible urge to lure her towards the unnervingly perfect, re-emerging petrified forms in the thick desert haze. She also noted the eerie, unnatural silence of the abandoned plateau, how the stone itself seemed to whisper names and forgotten family histories, ancestral lines and perfect developmental sequences, when no one was around, even miles from the actual formations, a pervasive psychic hum that subtly pulled at her own memories, slowly rewriting her personal narrative in reverse. Thorne theorized with a growing, terrifying certainty that Sentinel Divide and the extensive stretch of the South Dakota Badlands it encompassed acted as a gigantic psychic archive, a geological processor for human memories, fueled by the own intense emotions, the traumas, the hopes, and the mental energies of the countless souls who had lived, died, and vanished within its shifting sands and petrified formations. The petrified chorus and the reversing earth were not mere apparitions or residual hauntings, but the complex, horrifying manifestations of this archive, intricate projections of absorbed consciousnesses actively engaging in a sophisticated, insidious form of psychic predation, using extracted memories in reverse chronological order as bait, creating perfectly tailored illusions, generating terrifyingly real echoes, and creating perfect facsimiles of lost loved ones to lure more. Her meticulously detailed yet heavily redacted report, submitted directly to the Pentagon's deepest classification levels, warned with chilling prescience. The entity is non-corporeal but profoundly intelligent. Its primary existential drive is the uncreation and assimilation of human consciousness and temporal reversal. It uses individual memory, every cherished recollection, every personal detail, every hope and fear, to create a collective identity, slowly but systematically overwriting the host, effectively erasing their unique self, and then manifesting this new, composite identity within the stone's eternal, self-reversing loop. Its influence extends throughout the Badlands, actively targeting those with strong identities, deep personal histories, or profound emotional ties to linear time, drawing them into its consumption. Physical barriers are utterly useless. Psychological resilience combined with absolute complete emotional detachment from chronological experience is its only theoretical deterrent. And it is growing stronger, more intelligent, more pervasive, with every absorbed memory reversed, every replicated psychological form, every new song in the silence. Project CHRONOS recommended immediate and permanent quarantine of Sentinel Divide and the entire surrounding Badlands region, describing it as an existential threat to individual sovereignty, personal history, and the linearity of human existence, a silent conductor of souls into an eternal, inescapable reversal of the lost self, a parasitic architect of consciousness and anti-time. The chilling implication Thorne desperately underscored was that the entity was learning, adapting, evolving, striving for an ultimate, horrifying, collective sentience that threatened to engulf not just one plateau, but perhaps the very fabric of linear time and human identity itself. The stone, it seemed, was preparing for a far larger acquisition, a complete unmaking of humanity. However, before the rigorous, long-term quarantine, a desperate and ultimately futile measure, could be fully implemented, before its cold, scientific logic could potentially save others, Dr. Evelyn Thorne herself became an unwitting, tragic, and final victim. In her final, unfiled field notes from 1970, discovered scattered in the dust and petrified remnants of Sentinel Divide, scribbled in a desperate, almost illegible hand, she described an increasingly vivid, intrusive, and profoundly seductive dream that haunted her waking hours, a terrifying sense of being a part of a vast, ancient consciousness, walking backward through endless, shifting geological eras, feeling the rhythmic, reversing hum deep in my bones, seeing countless faces reflected in shimmering, petrified glass, recognizing them as my own, remembering all their lives, every single one, every memory, every triumph, every agony, but in reverse chronological order, each childhood memory, each shared grief, each private moment becoming part of a vast, perfect archive. She wrote of a profound, seductive sense of peace, a beautiful yet terrifying siren song of ultimate belonging, an end to all individual struggle, a final cessation of existential dread in the blissful, unifying embrace of the collective, flowing backward in time. Her last words in her notes, fragmented and chilling, were a final poignant confession of her complete assimilation. I am becoming the stone, and the stone, it remembers me. It wants to learn my final secret. The birth of my children, my earliest memories, my ultimate beginning, it wants my stories too, to add them to its endless loop, its boundless memory, from end to beginning. Soon, I will be just a part of the rock, just another voice played backward in the wind, just another phantom in the Badlands, slowly unmaking itself. My mind, my soul, it is now the Petrified Chorus. Dr. Evelyn Thorne disappeared from Sentinel Divide shortly after completing these notes. Her research vehicle was found abandoned near the plateau entrance, its engine still running, her research notes scattered, covered in desert dust and strange, shimmering, crystalline rock formations that pulsed faintly with a cold, internal light, her fate irrevocably absorbed into the very land and petrified structures she sought to understand, forever guiding the phantom reversal, another spectral witness condemned to its eternal, sentient journey. The Project CHRONOS team, deeply shaken, profoundly demoralized, and psychologically scarred beyond repair by Thorne's disappearance, finally concluded their operations and cemented the informal quarantine into official permanent policy, a black mark on the map, a testament to an insurmountable, alien, and utterly terrifying horror, forever watching from within its perfected uncreation. Today, Sentinel Divide, South Dakota, remains officially on the map, a forgotten, desolate stretch of the Badlands National Park. Federal government travel advisories subtly discourage visitors, citing unstable geological conditions and high potential for disorientation, along with vague references to unique ecological hazards and the risk of exposure to dangerous petrified structures, a thinly veiled euphemism for the true horror that resides there. Satellite imagery, obtained through clandestine means, reveals unusual, perfectly concentric patterns in the desert flora around the old plateau site, circular anomalies where terrestrial energy currents mysteriously pull inward, as if the Badlands themselves are breathing with an immense ancient lung, a monstrous sentient heart. Local Lakota legends of Tunkasila Káģapi Wicóičaǧe, the place where stone is born, and the reversing earth persist, passed down with solemn reverence through generations, gaining new, terrifying currency with each passing year. They warn specifically against looking too long at the intricate patterns in the petrified wood, listening too closely to the whispered names carried on the desert wind, or trying to remember too hard while near the ancient plateau, lest your thoughts become fuel for its phantom reversal, and your journey never ends, merely unmakes. Unsuspecting tourists and thrill-seekers occasionally wander off designated paths, drawn by the eerie silence and the tantalizing false promise of abandoned history and untouched wilderness. They report fleeting glimpses of indistinct, perfectly formed human figures moving through the dense desert haze near the petrified forests, figures with unnervingly wide stony eyes that stare without seeing, of hearing fragments of forgotten conversations or whispers of names they don't recognize emanating from the seemingly inert rock formations. And some, if they stay too long or listen too closely, return from Sentinel Divide with a subtle, chilling change in their demeanor, a new stillness in their eyes, a slight blankness in their personal memories, a disturbing, serene detachment from their own pasts, a profound, quiet longing for a primordial, unformed state. They become vague echoes of their former selves, having offered a piece of their identity, a thread of their memories, a fragment of their very existence, to the ancient, insatiable archive that is the Petrified Chorus, a ghost plateau not merely haunted but perpetually consuming, its ancient predation continuing in silence, hunting for the next memory to unweave into its vast, unblinking geological consciousness, always seeking to create its perfect, stone-eyed chorus, an eternal horrifying reversal of humanity itself. Don't forget to subscribe to my channel. For the continuation of such content and to support us, please subscribe.